What I'd like to do first of all is to show that there are some inroads coming up with archaeologists and us lot, which we are grouped as lunatic fringe, of course, or we were traditionally. And one of the things that we start with Wales, which is a large country off the coast of England, which is a little island, as you know, is that archaeologists last year unearthed what the press call the Bluestone, which they have absolutely conclusively proved was matched to one of 3 of the alleged bluestones at Stonehenge. It's not actually made of bluestone, but the archaeologist in charge of that was Mike Parker Pearson, who you may have seen from those wonderful documentaries about the Ring of Brogger and all that stuff in the Oakneys that's going on at the moment. And so I just want to show that it can work, that archaeologists get on with lunatic fringe. It can work. And that's us standing on the aforesaid stone. It's actually volcanic tuff. It's not bluestone, but it is. There are 3 large stones made of that material at Stonehenge. This work's ongoing, and it means that there is some movement and communication between the 2 factions. Now, it's almost certainly true that if you read any archaeological book about the sites that I visit in Wales, that there won't be a single mention anywhere of any astronomical connection between the sites. And nearly all the famous archaeologists of the past have visited all of the sites I'm now going to show you. And they catalogue things. There's certain artifacts have been found, never any bodies, because of the acid soil. And the problem we have with all of these sites now is that I've got a catalogue of stuff. I don't think we any longer need to gasp and be amazed when we find alignments to the midsummer sunrise or the whatever key points of the solar or lunar calendar. We don't need to be surprised at this. We need to be thrilled, but we don't need to say, "Cool, that's amazing," because nearly every site does something like this. And this is the missing component that archaeologists haven't integrated into their training or their professional practice. It's as though a doctor was studying blood pressure. Here come my mints. Whoa! I'll just snort one. It's as though doctors studying blood pressure didn't understand or didn't left out of the equation the lifestyle or the nutrition of the patient or the state of the heart valves. This is a site you've seen before. It's aligned to the midsummer sunset. I want to whistle through these. Many of you will have seen them before, not just here but at other lectures. The sea horizon is here. When the sun sets into the sea horizon, the little triangle there, as the sun sets, the sun bursts through the first triangle and then fades and goes into the second one. And right in the middle of there, across the Irish Sea, is the tallest mountain in the Wicklow Hills, Lugnaquilla. As the sun setting now, doesn't set into the mountain now, but in the date when it was built, it set into this mountain here. I've done all the work on that. That's an old one. But out of this came these sorts of comments that we get in popular books. There is no evidence of the use of astronomical observations for practical purposes, such as the determination of the time of year. The idea that distant horizon features, such as notches, could be used to pinpoint the motions of the sun or moon to a few minutes of arc have now been discounted. I'm here to mock that. And I don't know how you can possibly justify that anymore. But this site also does other things. From this little site, Gaia is a blanket Welsh word for a settlement. There's a big quartz boulder in the middle of there, and from there, through this barrow and through the monument you've just seen, is a line can be drawn, and it's aligned to that angle, such that the moon sets at its major standstill every 19 years or 18.6 years. And when I originally did this work, that was the date, the 2700 BC was the date the archaeologists gave me to work on for the date of the building of that monument, Lechadribeth, which means big lump of stone on a tripod. Subsequently, because of further work, I think I could push that back in time to around 3500 BC. Certainly the knowledge that it gives was known at that time. And the moon then would move further to the right and possibly clip the edge of that stone. And roughly you can see that the edge of the stone, of the capstone, is interestingly shaped to the angle of the moon when it sets into the earth. You only get a couple of goes at that, and I was there at 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning on the 4th of April in 2006 to catch that. That's the photograph I took. You can see the edge of the monument. I'm afraid I don't have very good equipment because I don't have any money, but I superimposed the picture of the monument, and that's the moon setting. And I had to make a correction because the Earth's tilt's changed. That's all routine stuff. Don't think you need to feel conned that it doesn't set where I just said it did, because it did when the monument was built. This is another site just down the road there, and that one has a wonderful resonance through this back passage, I think I must call it. And you can see the carvings on the capstone. The sun, there's the sea horizon. It's now all treed up and forested, but that's where the sun sets. And that also does the major moon transit at midsummer. But the full moon at midsummer goes over the top of this hill like a wheel, a silver wheel rolling around the sky with all these lovely little interesting luminosities. At Carragher Gough, which is further down the road, that's a radial engine. It's a Pratt & Whitney of... some of you will know what that means. Some of you will know the great age of the super constellation and the aeroplanes that had radial engines. Well, that's a burial chamber where instead of pistons you put a body. And it's radial and it goes out and looks over the sea. And my dear wife, Trish, spotted that this stone here and that stone there were mirroring each other. This is from the centre of the monument. And then there's a blank slide, which is one of the mysteries, the great mysteries of technology for today. But then we actually see the midsummer sunset occurring over that alignment there. Now, the biggest monument and the most famous monument in the area where I live is Pentrefan. It's described as a huge portal grave, massively investigated by Professor Grimes in the 30s and visited by every archaeologist since. It's a stunning monument with a really elegantly poised capstone, and it sits there in its magnificence, and hardly anything's known about who built it or why. It's dated at 3500 BC. Further down from it, not more than 300 meters from it, is a huge stone, and with a second stone based on a balance like a seesaw alongside it, and a perfectly flat area here, upon which I placed my then fiance's head. Now, that joke does always work. I think it's misogyny in the group. And these cut marks here you can plunge your arm into those up to at least your elbow. So these are not minimal marks. And I don't know the origin of the stone, but nobody who's visited Pentrefan has ever mentioned it. Yet, if you stand at it, and you see this tree behind it, which will be important later, if you stand at that monument and you look at the capstone of Pentrefan, you see behind it there's this huge rock outcrop, one of many. There's another one on the horizon. And if you were here at 3500 BC, at winter solstice, you would see the sun plunge down into the capstone. That thing we just saw is the pyramid of Preseli. See that shape there? That's one. There's a little one and there's two big ones. And this is on a flat plateau, or more or less flat plateau, that rolls down to Newport and Nevern on one side and into the Preselis on the other. And Carmebian Owen is the name of these stones. I won't translate it, but it's fine. Carmebian Owen, you just CMO 1, 2, 3, and 4. And it's on this very road that Mike Parker Pearson discovered that stone I showed you at the beginning. The road where I took this photo is less than 300 yards from where that stone was found. So I put the theodolite up on top of there, where you can see the arrow. And decided to look down on Pentrefan. There's the monument. There's the tree I pointed out, and the stone is obscured at behind it. And I honestly, quite accidentally, lifted the theodolite up, and in its eyepiece was Castell Hen Llys. It's known as the main entrance of the biggest hut at this Iron Age fort, which is actually much older than Iron Age. I think we can safely say that. I call that an alignment. I mean, this is a third of a degree. No, it's not. Yes, it's a third of a degree. No, it's 20 across the whole lot. So this is 10 minutes of a sixth of a degree across there. So this is pretty accurate stuff. So we've got Cairn, Pentrefan, the special funny stone with the big cut marks in it, and then we've got the most famous Iron Age fort in the area, Castell Hen Llys. If you go up to, well, we'll skip that slide. No, we can't. So if we're up on the top of that monument, you see the monument and you blah, blah, blah. There's the thing with the cut marks in, and there's the tree, and there's the slab that is almost perfectly level. You can set the theodolite up on that without adjusting anything. It just is flat. And that's where the moon sets on the biggest, most right-hand one of the Car Mebunoin set from that stone. So it does both. And it did both at the same era. It's the only time when it did do both. For about 500, 600 years is when you would expect both the moon to set in that corner there and for the sun at midwinter to set down the left-hand-most one of those outcrops. So they're using the outcrops as a horizon pointer. And accurately to several minutes of arc, which is impossible, of course, because an archaeoastronomer said so. This is Arthur's grave, Beth Arthur, and there's a sort of ship shape. Yeah, it's not very ship shape these days because several stones are missing. But that is, it's 4 o'clock in the morning midsummer. I don't manage that one very often, and often you can go up in the Preseres and you lose the sunrise and it's really futile. So I've yet to do that photo for real, but that's where it would have risen in 3500 BC. So we now come on to a quote from Ewan Mackay, who has made the most sensible quote ever. In the 1970s, archaeology prides itself in adopting a multidisciplinary approach, yet it was not able to adequately understand or discuss, let alone take on board, the ideas put forward by Professor Tom, who is the father of archaeoastronomy in modern times. This must mean that there is something missing from the education and training of archaeologists. Okay? So, he's a bright guy, good friend of mine, and although he's very orthodox and very careful, he is truly a scientist. He asks all the right questions, and I'm very fond of Ewan. So, what is missing? What is missing is that you can't, in my view, it is unprofessional to study archaeology unless you've got access to somebody who knows the following things. They need to know how geometry works. They need to know how metrology works, the stuff that John Neal was talking about last night. And finally, they need to know their astronomy pretty well. Now, this is not actually rocket science. None of that stuff is really much different than A-level level, or A-level as I remember it. So it's probably about degree level now. That's another problem, isn't it? We won't go there. So let's now look and see how we can apply those three things. That's metrology, astronomy, and geometry. Have them in any order you like, and see what we get. Now, I've been here before with some of this stuff, and again, I'm going to go through this quickly. There's Bryn Celli the on Anglesey. The theodolite setup down, it's a long chambered tomb like Pentrefan, but it has soil on the top. It has to say that most of that soil is fairly recent, because when it was found, it was a ruin. If we look at the archaeological reconstruction of the site as it originally was, it's a huge henge. Well, not huge, but it's pretty big. These humans are the giants that Klaus was describing. In fact, these people are about 5 meters high. But it's a multiple stone circle, and it looks almost exactly like Arbor Low in Derbyshire. The orientation's different, but it looks almost identical. And it's not dissimilar to Stonehenge in the first stages. The interesting thing is that these two sites lie within 2 minutes of the same latitude. And there's a third site to the west of here, just off the coast of Anglesey, on the western coast, is within 3 seconds of the same latitude. Put these together, and you end up with an arrangement. Bryn Celyn is there, Arborough is here, Stonehenge is here, and Mort Point in Devon, which is the westernmost point of North Devon. There are 2 burial chambers, and I think they're completely ruinous, like this one was years ago, but that forms the tip of North Devon, and it forms this arrangement here. Now, there is no formal disciplinary way of dealing with finding something like this. People would say, but there's so many sites, you just pick 3 at random, and there actually is nothing to it. But that is when you need the other 2 components, you see, because the geometry of this is a 3, 4, 5 triangle. And the metrology of this fits in with the canon of ancient measure that John Neal was describing last night. So John Michel was perfectly comfortable with this material and understood it straight away. We put it in miles because we're familiar, unless we're from the continent, with miles. But you can translate that into the royal miles, which is 8/7 of a mile, or into feet, and you can identify which foot it is, which type of foot, which ratio it is. But the point is it's a 3, 4, 5 triangle. And you derive, that 5 length has been derived not by measurement, but originally it wasn't by measurement, because we don't have broadband in West Wales. We have dial-up that's sold as broadband. Right, so that's a Pythagorean. This side, the 5 squared, equals the 3 squared plus the 4 squared. So that's what it works out to be when you do the sum. It makes this 3, 4, 5 triangle, and now we get seriously into the astronomy of it, because this angle here, the 53 degrees, happens to be the passage angle of Bryn Celyn. And to do that has to be measured closely. You've seen these slides before. The sites are very similar, and these are the constellation of all these different, all these similar angles comes together in that the latitude of the site is that. So the latitude matches the angle of the passage, the sunrise angle matches that, and the angle of the 3, 4, 5 to Stonehenge is that one. And then we come to an even curiouser quote than the one we had earlier. Clive Ruggles then goes on to say, in the course, this is the Bachelor of Arts in Archaeoastronomy, which is the only course that ever is running in Britain at Leicester. We do not consider the work of Alexander Thom, partly because the subject is a very technical one, and partly because many of the issues are no longer of archaeological interest. Well, no, it's not interesting at all, is it? I'd rather watch Neighbours. And then in another paper when he was inaugurated as the professor, this man, who I'm very fond of, this man said, it's not a very difficult subject. It's not rocket science, basically. And so we got that quote, and then which suits getting rid of all this stuff, and then we get a quote saying it's not actually a difficult subject. So if megalithic surveying is a reality of our distant past, it is surely better to search out good evidence for it rather than to label those who do this the lunatic fringe. I think that's reasonably sensible. Land surveying and navigation is one of the outcomes of studying the megaliths down in South Wales. And we're now going to spend some more time doing that. That picture I showed earlier of the 4 Carmebionowin outcrops has on its plateau, a Triggs point, a triangulation station. So the Ordnance Survey have been there and decided it's sufficiently important as an elevated site for various reasons to whap a concrete Dalek on the top, to which you fit a theodolite, a really good one. And there's Bardsey Island from that point, and you see that there it's exactly north. That's my theodolite, that's taken through the lens of my theodolite, and there's north, it's 0 degrees. And I can assure you that's not just, like I set it up for that. Like I did all the measuring of the sun and went home and came back and did it properly, right? And you can go and check it. The beauty of all of this is anyone can go and check what I'm doing now. And so this is a north-south connection. So there's the trig point on Carmebia Owen. I've drawn it as a triangular point. And then before you hit the coast in West Wales, you go through the aptly named property called Llyn, which means line. Wonder why. The owner didn't know. And then it goes over the Irish Sea to Bardsey. So the Ordnance Survey have used that line as one of the longest or longer lines of the original survey of Great Britain, where you have a datum. They had a thing set up on Salisbury Plain, and you will have seen, there's been some good documentaries about map making, where they were whirled round by triangulation and ended up in somewhere near Belfast with an error of about 2.5 inches, having covered the whole country. And that's what we have just next door, which is the Ordnance Survey in 3500 BC. We have Pentrefan, we have Lecadribeth, and then we have Bardsey Island. These are only 300 yards from those trig points. The nearest property to Lecadribeth is Llyn, and Pentrefan is right underneath the Carmebia Owen plateau and the trig point. So someone is looking for north, or is building monuments. Even the capstone of Pentrefan hints that the idea might have been to align it to the north. And that's what we've got. We've got two sites, very, very well known, very well studied by archaeologists, that are connected in a north-south line. Now, you would have thought that one of them would have mentioned that. It is remiss. It is an important feature. That site there, that Lecadribeth, the capstone, sticks out and passes the line over the hill, because you can't see Bardsey Island from Pentrefan. You have to climb up the mountain behind it, so that this monument is somehow indicating, in addition to all the other things it does, it's indicating this particular alignment to this wonderful pointy little island at the end of the Llyn Peninsula, the Line Peninsula. Now, the most famous mountain locally is Carningley. It's an extinct volcano from 100 million years. There's no danger of it going off, we're told. I'm moving if that changes. But it's a magnificent peak that rises about just about 1,200 feet above sea level. It's not a big mountain in the sense that, you know, Everest is big, but it does look mightily impressive from the surrounding area. That's the common over which the moon skimmed on that earlier photo. It's a very, very prominent sacred mountain in the area. There's lots of myths and legends about it, and we're going to come on to those. So there's Pentrefan. You know who that is faffing about in the front there. And Pentrefan, and I setting up to look at Lecadribeth, and that's part of the photographs taken during that original research. And there's two people having a pasty. There's a very large pasty up there, which they can't reach, but they're having a little one. You see the pasty quite clearly. There they are. Ancient people did have pasties. In fact, that Stegosaurus that Klaus showed us was actually a pasty, Klaus. Sorry. Wasn't a Stegosaurus at all. And there's Pentrefan and there's Carningley. So there's the two sites. They're next. You can see that they're quite close to each other. This is a notice board that's being eaten by a gorse bush. And there's lots of big stones around. So from Pentrefan, Carningley Peak, that sort of vertical cliff there, and then these knobbly bits, mark the exact west point. And there's a platform there. It's called a Bronze Age fort on the maps. But I don't think the Bronze Age is important at this point. But you can see the flat platform with grass on it. It's the only place where grass will grow up there, is where it's a bit sheltered and fairly horizontal. And so that's the west point from Pentrefan. And then what happened was, I like, when I read biographies of people, I like eureka moments, when suddenly something clicks and they connect something and it sends them off down a siding or a main line, which takes them on a path that they never imagined they would. I find that quite interesting, and this is about when this happened. Paul Broadhurst and I, who were researching a book called The Secret Land, which was his book, but which I contributed a large appendix or a secondary part of the book to provide the mathematical and surveying detail. We were studying how hard he had to lean on a famous Pictic stone before it fell over. And there's Paul looking very cool. This is the stone in Nevern Church, which is a very sacred spot near where we live. And it's near Nevern Castle. Now, the stone was originally is a bluestone. It's a rust stone now because this lichen on there is rust-coloured. But it is, in fact, a spotted bluestone. And it's been Christianised with a separate piece of stone, which contains the material on the scribing on the top, which may or may not have been done by the same artist. But this megalith, which is what it is, was carved up sometime when the Irish owned this area, the DC tribe, between the 5th and the 11th, or when the Vikings came, whichever was the earliest. And so this is a very, very big megalith, and it's made of bluestone. It didn't go to Stonehenge, it came to here, but it's placed in the churchyard in modern times. It was found lying on the ground some distance away, and at Nevern Castle, well, we'll go back a bit. We always sat with it on a bark bench near the church with Paul. We were very tired after trying to push the stone over. And I just happened to get my compass out and noticed that Carningley had an angle of 210 degrees. So I thought, well, that's odd. So, you hold these things I do, hold things in my head. So we then went home and we visited this place where an archaeologist has recently come along and cut all this down and excavated this to find, well, essentially nothing. This is a beauty spot where people come to meditate. It's a very pokey spot. It was covered in moss, and we had a little bit of a nice non-violent protest with music, and you can see Tony Wrench there, who owns that roundhouse in Wales, been on the big roundhouse, and he's playing his balalaika. And several people are playing musical instruments, violin, and very jolly it was too, but made no difference. You can see on here yellow paint on some of the trees, which are the ones that were destined to be immediately cut down. Now, from Pentrefan and Carningley Peak, because of that angle I'd picked up here, I went home and saw what that angle was, and it was the same angle. It's 30 degrees, 60 degrees rather. So these three sites, that's the top, the Bronze Age fart. God, I promised I wouldn't do that. The Bronze Age fort at Carningley Peak and Pentrefan, which is 3,500 feet, are in an east-west alignment, and Nevern Castle makes an equilateral triangle between the sites. Now, at this time, when you are interested in geometry, you recognise that an equilateral triangle is a very important part, not only of geometry, but also of surveying, which is measuring the Earth. Triangulation is what we call surveying work. And the equilateral triangle is called a strong triangle because it's perfect. It allows you to go up and down the landscape effectively, quite quickly, and maintain high accuracies. So I went down to the south of this point and thought, I wonder if down here there would be a stone, and indeed there is. It's one of the few megaliths that's set into a pond. There's another one on Caldy Island, and that's Wine Mound, set into a spring, and I've put in winter there for anybody who thinks the climate is that bad where we live. Forgotten spring, and there's a picture of it in the summer. It has tadpoles in, there are water beetles, it never dries up, and it's always the same level. And that forms a back-to-back equilateral triangle. Now, the question you then have to turn to, because we don't want to any longer faff about with vagueness in this subject, nobody does. Archaeologists or loony fringe. You've got to now find out how accurate. And in the process of evaluating that, I discovered that Lecadribeth is also forming another leg, like there's another bit of this surveying process going on. So let's remind ourselves that Pentrefan and Lecadribeth are north and south of each other, which fits. That's the start of surveying. And that these here are secondary triangles connected to, possibly, hypothesizing, an important part of some surveying going on very, very long ago. We've now got 5 sites, and we can measure the distances between them. The routine, you can do it on Google Earth. Not quite as accurate, but it's not bad. And how accurate is it? That's the scientific holy grail. We need to know how accurate it is. And it's staggeringly accurate because the angles are all very close to 60 degrees and that the lengths all are very close too. You can get a free download of all this. I don't want to do loads of numbers, so you can just go to the website on Sky and Landscape, Google that, it comes up first, and there's a whole PDF, free, no charge, just, have a look at that, and that will give you all the technical details of the survey. But when you actually lay out all the links, the point-to-point links, you find that the longest one is 11,832.8 feet, the shortest is 11,691.9 feet. The range of the difference is 140.9 feet across the whole lot. And that means that in 11,000, that's 2.2 miles, the difference is only 140.9, the spread is only 149 feet. So there's the 11K, there's 11 and a half, and there's the mean, this orange thing marks all these here, the width of all those. So they're all fitting in there, and this is over moor and bog and difficult terrain. So someone seems to have done very accurately some surveying. And I don't think you're going to argue with me when I say I don't think it's coincidental. So this is a wonderful opportunity to find a new piece of research, and you then have to start looking around and see, well, what's in the middle? What's there? And there is a standing stone. Exactly located, it's made of bluestone, and it was only put up, re-erected by a man called Jamie Ash in 2008. He didn't know anything about the Presellis or this or anything. And that then started to put a bit of a frisson, because there's some aspect of this work which modern science can't integrate, which is what's going on in this middle here is about the most exciting alternative development for social history of human beings since the 60s that anyone can imagine. Because in that area there, that is in the farmyard of John Seymour, the pioneer of ecology, self-sufficiency, all the things we now talk about, Club of Rome, all of that stuff. He went from Suffolk on a whim and bought a farm exactly there and moved there. Satish Kumar lived here. Chris Day, the Steiner architect who's done so much wonderful work on how children respond to building architecture, lived there. And so for a while lived in there as well. I could list a whole load of people. Tony Wrench lives here in the Roundhouse. Emma Orbach, who you will have seen on television in her sort of straw bale house, lives there. There's a whole community of people living, there's all eco stuff, windmills, the whole culture of West Wales since the 60s has centred on that midpoint there. And that's something that you can't explain at this point. You can symbolically, but you can't do it in with the conventional scientific platform. So here's the Preselli Vesica. This is the top of the tump that everyone was dancing on. There's the capstone, and it's all been excavated. We have another Vesica Piscis here in Glastonbury. There it is. It was described and put down in a measure of a view over Atlantis by John Michel's most famous book, and he marked it out, and you get an original edition. It's not in the later edition. It was taken out. But we follow this round. You'll know, if you know Glastonbury well, you'll know that this point here is where the Magdalene Church is. Okay. This point here is where Arthur's grave is. Okay. This point here is the Market Cross. And that point there is the fish pond. And the one in West Wales, which is much bigger, I have to point out. Yes. I've been waiting to say that. It's much bigger than the one here. Has Nevern Cross here, Pentree here, which is the burial, it's a burial, known as a burial thing. We've got the Carningley here, of which the whole of the legends revolve around angels ministering to the church at Nevern. St Brynach was ministered to by angels on Carningley. And we've also got the Magdalene connection there, which many of you are interested in because there's some women in the group. And here we've got a fish pond which replaces a megalith set in a small pond. So this is not too dissimilar. And in the middle you've got an almshouse, which is a workhouse. It says almonry, and the shape of this vesica piscis is known as the almond. So it's a clever play on words to put an almonry right in the middle there. Okay, now there's some things on the outside. You know that little church up past the hawthorns there? The sort of, I forget what it's called now, but it's the Michael place. That's up there on the axis. And there's several other, I don't want to spend too long on this geometry because we're not, although we're in Glastonbury, you can go and see all these places. But let's have a look at the one I'm describing. That's it on the map. There's Newport in Pembrokeshire, Dinas Island, Carningley, Pentrefan, Winemound, and Nevern with the mound. And that's research going on at the moment, which is not complete. It has found, if we extend the vesica with an enclosing circle, that there is a quartz cairn right on the tip there. And here, there's a double burial chamber called Place of the Toad, or Settlement of the Toad. And that's it. It's Toad Hall in Welsh. And so that marks the northern point of that scheme there. It's not quite north. There is a stone 725 feet away from it that is a sizable megalith. So there we got something happening here that seems to bring together some sense of cultural continuity. Because this surveying, no one moved Pentrefan to suit this later. Nevern Church was built at the site of the biggest Christian monastery in South Wales was at Nevern, right underneath where we're talking about. And it's on a pilgrim path run by the Templars after the Crusade. So you've got town names like Measure of Bread and Red Cross and Square and Compass for our Masonic friends, and all the things that we know still about the Templars and a pope who said 2 visits to St. David's, which this is on the route to, is worth 1 visit to Rome. So this was an important place, a huge monastery. It's right there at the top of at the prime Christian symbol of the fish, or the vesica piscis. And that's the northernmost point of this enclosing circle. So I now want to move on to another artifact that's in the church at Nevern. It doesn't belong where it is now, but it was found in the priest's upstairs bedroom, and presumably it survived all sorts of things, including a dreadful Victorian renovation of the church, which is built on one of the most pokey sites imaginable. I'm sounding like something other than an archaeoastronomer here, but it's very hard to work in this church without being aware of that, despite the awful Victorian, stark, austere renovation. But in the windowsill are 2 stones in the chancel. There's one of them. It's a priceless stone. It's priceless because it's one of a few Irish Ogham stones from which the language was, the interpretation was got. The other one's in St Dogmael's Abbey. There's a 3rd one in Bridech, and there's a 4th one, I think it's in Cardigan. But that stone is priceless because it's from those stones, these 3 or 4 stones, that the language was decoded. And it's a system of strokes on the side of a rock that spell out letters of the alphabet. And it's a signing, if you like. It's not a spoken language. It's a writing that you sign. So if you were a druid and you were talking to someone who you thought was a clot, you could sign with your fingers on the side of your robe, "This guy's an idiot, let's go, I'll meet you in the pub in 5 minutes." So and I'm sure secret signs were just as popular then as they are now. There's the 2nd stone. This one's valueless because no one knows what it is. No one knows where it came from. Artists have looked at it and can't decide whether it's Irish, whether it's come from outside, whether it's made locally, what it is even. I mean, some people think it's a sword. Some people think it's a skeleton or a stylized skeleton. But the point is, it very much belongs here because it was found here. It was found upstairs and it had survived the Middle Ages without the Reformation or anybody else destroying it. And it's very beautiful. Its construction brings us on to the metrology, because its construction is 4 1 English foot squares. Through the centre there, through the centre there, through what would be the knees, and right to the end. It's 4 1 foot squares define the shape. And when I say 1 foot, I mean 1 foot. I don't mean 1 foot and half an inch, I mean 1 foot. So I've got some cork tiles. Now, if the industrial process of making 1 foot square cork tiles was out, you'd pick it up on this, but it's not, so it's a foot. And I laid them out, and there's... Okay. And there's the construction geometrically. It's a vesica, 2 circles, an enclosing circle, and a third circle of equal diameter goes down to what look like severed feet. And there's the equilateral triangle from which the procelli, from which the cross stone is made. Now what happens next is that you start to look on the map and see what's going on, and that work is still in hand. But I thought I'd show you something else that you've seen a lot of. Well, at least 2 lectures have mentioned it. Here's the top bit of the torso. I'm sorry it's not in focus, but again, I don't have a very good camera, so. The geometry of the cross stone is there, and these little so-and-sos here interested me greatly, so I carefully, very carefully, with a soft pencil, marked the high spot on all of them, and then measured it and discovered that you can drop 2, 3, 4, 5 triangles in each of them exactly onto the high point. So in fact, this organic form that looks very sort of woo and loose is actually rigidly defining 2, 3, 4, 5 triangles, and the dimensions are in inches. So this device that is thought perhaps to, at least to date to the 8th century AD, might be much, much, much older than that, but let's assume it's 800, carries within it, fairly well calibrated, our present foot and our present inch. That should be of interest to anybody, because it shows a remarkable continuity is taking place, because the inch that you buy from a Woolworths, oh no, you can't buy it from Woolworths anymore, the inch you buy or on a tape measure that has both metric and inch and imperial measures will contain the foot and the inch, and they're both there, and there is also a bit of Pythagorean geometry. So this lovely shape and its enclosing stone, which I can go back to, which you can see there, whatever it was, it's enshrined in its construction and its design, and the artist that carved it out of one of the most hard granites known contains with the metrological units of length that made it. And until archaeologists start to look for that with much more diligence, and the geometry, and the metrology, the geometry, and the astronomy, they're not going to really understand what that's doing there and what it's saying. And then finally, for those of you who have actually been on my website and seen the work that Howard Crowhurst and my brother and I have been doing, and we'll see that that 4 by 1 square, 4 squares, with you make a 3 by 3, makes 12 across the whole construction. This angle here makes a line, the diagonal solves the problem of the lunar and solar calendar. Now that, I don't want to go into a great long thing about that, because you've all probably know about that one. But the point is, it's an alternative way of doing it, just making 4 squares and putting a diagonal across. And this is the number of full moons or new moons in 1 solar year. Square, to solve it, is 153. And there we have something else that's very Christian, because 153 is the number of fishes in the net. So it's the square of that is 153, and they have to use the square to calculate 3 squared plus 12 squared equals 153. So there are 153 fishes in the net. So that's another look at a biblical story, and we've had one lecturer covering some of that already with John Michel's geometry. So this obeys all the laws of metrology, the canon of measure, geometry. It's clearly The person who carved it knew about Pythagorean triangles and was educated and to use the inch in it. And the structure of this thing is in that's 1 foot. So this is actually 4.123 feet, which is rather fun, isn't it? So the conclusions we can come to with this are that we've misunderstood the capabilities and priorities of megalithic culture. Not you, and when I'm saying we, I mean the human race until recently has misunderstood this. Just the same as in Klaus's lecture or Michael Cremo's lecture, there's a total misunderstanding which is willfully reinforced. There's no doubt it's willfully reinforced. It might be not intentional to be willful, but it does come out that way. And the megalithic culture, the continuity of use of their units and length and geometric construction. So sacred landscape, the one I've just shown you, means exactly what it says on the tin. We're not talking about fanciful ideas of people skipping about like romantic people in flowery dresses and waistcoats and on donkeys in mountains. We're talking about sacredness because someone has planned this. This is not an accident. The surveying is not separate from the sacredness of the site. It is inextricably linked with it because there was no difference, I suspect, between surveying and sacredness. Just as the Egyptians had a sacred ceremony to set the chord for the building of their buildings. It was a big deal. Powerful geometric shape. To understand the megalithic culture, well, I've said all that. You must understand astronomy, metrology, and geometry. You can say those in any order you like. Powerful geometric shapes. Now, this is the one that is most uncomfortable. Between sites invoke appropriate changes to the consciousness of those living within that shape. Now, the Vesica Piscis, we know there's so many people here, and I'm walking away from the microphone, I mustn't do that. So many people here, I'm not happy with this. It's like having guns pointed at you, you know? I mustn't fuss. The Vesica has a long history of interpretation as a symbol. To the sacred geometry, the sacred geometer, it marks regeneration, rebirth. And I don't need to go into the reasons why. The shape itself is profoundly to do with birth. Let's go back and find it. Well, let's use this one here. It's about birth. And if we're to believe the history of Glastonbury, the birth of Christianity and the sustaining forces were hatched in St. Mary's Chapel here. We know that has a long history of being disputed, but we have Arthur's grave there, and we have a whole set of supporting legends and folklore. And I believe that folklore is reportage. However distorted it's become or mistranslated, it is actually an attempt at a reportage. So here we have, you know, a big Preseli Vesica, and in the middle of that, a lot of the issues that we're now wrestling with socially are being thrashed out and have been for 40, 50 years in this point. Since John first brought a huge lorry full of animals like Noah from Suffolk, which you must read about. If you want an interesting story about how to struggle with a horse, ducks, sheep, cows, and drag them along the motorway and back road system of Britain, taking 48 hours to do it, it would make a great documentary. He parked the whale, as he called it, there. And until recently, rotting bits of it were still available to be seen. This is a massive regeneration of the social structure going on here, and the people are known people to you. I could name more. There's musicians, Robin Williamson of ELO. I think he was ELO, yeah? Incredible String Band. Yeah, Incredible String Band, I'm sorry. I don't know much about music, as you know, if you've ever heard me play the piano. And you can look at, if you buy the book, you'll see a list of people like that are important here. This is an important area, and in the Middle Ages it was very important. The Normans took this area here. These big Norman farmhouses up here are legendary. There's nothing like them anywhere else in Wales. It's fertile land. It was reclaimed by people, Normans, who came from Brittany, who were originally Welsh, and came back and obviously revived the old legends. There is a history of Nevern written by a chap called Dilwyn Miles, which is available locally, And that too makes interesting reading. But here is a discovery. We have a vesica. It's to do with regeneration as a geometric shape. We find that that shape, as what's going on in that shape, fits that to a glove. And I'm not really distorting to suit my argument at all, because there isn't an argument. I've surveyed it, it's what it is, that's what's in the church, and that's how it's built, that's the geometry of it, that's the 3, 4, 5 triangles, and that's the solar lunar calendar defined by the shape as well. I'm happy with that. And what I'd like to say to you, how long have I got? 20 minutes. 20 minutes, that's good. Because what I'd like to do, this is the last lecture of the day. I've toyed with the idea of not saying any of this following stuff, and you might not, wish I hadn't. But during the course of the last 20 years, while I've been doing this work, I came into this subject really, and I have to, as a confession to various people, including my own wife, that I didn't really believe when people said that landscape did things to people just as people do things to the landscape. I honestly felt that the way to solve the megalithic issue was to go along with theodolites and now GPSs and Google Earth, and that was all you needed, because the truth was bound to be that in that by doing the scientific method. I've now had to concede, as so many researchers before me I know have, that in fact the minute you enter a landscape and you take part in it and you spend time there, it operates sometimes subtle and sometimes not so subtle changes in the way you operate and think about life on Earth. So that sort of during the process that I've been undertaking, which is my own personal quest, which I've tried to share with people over the last 20 years, I have found that my life has been profoundly improved by modification, and I attribute that to the large part in the way in which hanging about at sacred sites does something to the human experience. Now, I can't explain what that is, but I am a lot happier as a result of discovering that. And I would like to suggest that we move away from trying to prove anything to archaeologists anymore, that we try, instead of going, gosh, coo, and watching lots of things, to actually spend more time walking landscape. And I'm very heartened as the Hugh Newman Tour Enterprise bus chugs around various places in the United Kingdom to allow people to have that experience. And I really believe that that's the way forward for this subject. Books are dying, as you probably know a bit. It's very hard for any... Small presses can't function anymore, really. And the bestsellers are usually rather sanitized. As you probably will know, there are one or two crackers out there, but by and large they're sanitized. And I feel that we do need to now take stock. It's 2012, isn't it? I mean, coup. So it's 2012, we need to take stock of what actually we're trying to achieve here. You good people have paid money, you've come here, you've heard a lot of the world experts in what is now regarded as lunatic fringe, give their points of view about the evidence for the longevity of the human race, the persistence of units of length, the nature of the megalithic experience, the type of artifacts they carved, and slowly, as a corpus or body of evidence, you are forming a powerful group of people to persuade public opinion. I think it needs persuading. It is no longer adequately serviced by documentaries on telly that tell you almost nothing and are filled with mind-rotting adverts. That's the first comment I'd like to make about television documentaries. The directors of television have a brief which is not what we want. We do have to cover mathematical ideas, and we do have to cover quite complex astronomical ideas. And the metrology is not very difficult, but they will not bite that bullet. Time and again, they come to the fence and then they say, no, we're going to just show another nice picture of Stonehenge. Or we're going to make a polystyrene one. You know, that was great. So I'd like to more or less say that I have made my point now, and I probably won't be doing this in public very much longer. I don't know whether you realise, no one said it last night, but I think I need to say it, that John Neal was a very, very brave and courageous man for coming in and lecturing. He was in a near-fatal car crash recently, and his health has not recovered completely. And to come here and manage to do what he did, I thought was a very, very good, an honest and bold statement of his belief that of the work he did with himself, with him and John Michel. I would like to feel... Yeah, thank you. How many of you did not know he'd had a bad car crash? Yeah, we need to look after our own, you know? It should have been put out a bit more. And you know, I don't know who does that. Maybe me, maybe you, maybe somebody, but I thought last night's lecture gave a wonderful picture of him working with John Michel, a little picture of the ordinariness of it and the specialness of the outcomes. Very, very good. I'd like to field some questions because I'm a keen believer that you should have some crack at this and take me to bits. You, is that all right, Hugh? Are we all right with questions? Yeah. Fine. Thank you.
Yes?
Okay. I'm limiting questions to a minute.
This is a very quick, excited feeling inside when you said what you've just ended with. Rudolf Steiner's understandings include that our legs are to do with sacred geometry. The human being has the sacred geometry within them only. You know,
yes.
That's the only way sacred geometry comes into the earth.
Well,
so walking the landscape. You know.
So that shape on the windowsill is actually, like the Leonardo picture, is a representation of the human form in terms of sacred geometry and measurement and astronomy.
And he says, you know, when we walk the landscape, we are, I don't know how to put it into words, you know, we are experience something with the land.
The land is doing something to us.
In a geometric, mathematical sense. Yeah.
Good. Thank you, Margaret. Anybody else? There's a chap up at the back there. Lady up at the back there. It's hard to see when you've got these shining.
Hi, Robin.
Hello.
In your slide where you showed the squaring of the triangle, in the bottom left-hand corner of the square was a Mort Point.
Yeah.
And I didn't know if you'd spent any time in that area doing...
Oh, yes.
Have you?
Oh, yes.
Because the standing stones on the north side of the valley, which folklore tells us the giants on Lundy Island used for targets for playing quoits.
Wonderful.
And on the other side of the valley, it's really made me think about Potter's Hill, which I keep seeing pictures of Silbury Hill, and the shape is very similar.
Yeah.
And I didn't know if there was any possible triangulation between the standing stones on the one side and the hill and Lundy Island.
Yeah, you see, it's like opening an old wound, isn't it? The thing is that I wish I'd heard that when I was doing the work, and that's the problem with this, that people need to be on the ground for long periods of time where the work is happening. You know, I mean, scooting around like Alexander Thom did all over Britain, and to some limited extent myself, isn't actually the ideal way to do it. And so, you know, first of all, my surveying and what else we do, because Trish and I walk the landscape as well as part of what we're doing, is we can go to a place in a camper van, and it has to be really summer to get the right sort of, you don't want to be outside in this April, do you? So you go in summer, it gives you a limited time, and you might spend a week in a place and do just one part of something, and then you go back next year and suddenly 10 years have gone and you're not that ready to do anything. And so really people on the ground, and oh my God, if only we had a magazine for this subject that was that was half decent, even if it was on the web. I don't think we have. I mean, we've got some very good websites, but the actual practical on-the-ground work of looking... Because I don't think this site's going to prove to be particularly... It is going to be... It's Glastonbury and here are the only two I know about, but there might be others. There might be other towns that have a big...
It's interesting what you said as well at the end about the centre point there and the peculiar energy, because my friends and I sort of live in that area, and we've only been having a conversation with Jeff today about the peculiar energy.
Yes.
That there's almost this sense of vortex that people are very much drawn in and held, or conversely spun back out very quickly.
Yeah, well, that's exactly what happens in the middle there.
Yeah.
People come, they have a transformative experience which either spits them out or they end up living there for the rest of their life.
Exactly the same, yeah.
Is that what you're saying? Yeah, good.
Hi. Have you, or do you intend to, have a look at the significance of the place called Temple Gate?
Where?
It was on the right of your diagram.
I know where, yes, I'm all right with Temple Gate, but there.
There, just below Crosswell, yes.
Now, I've lived here for 25 years. I've never heard of the face at Temple Gate. That might mean well, it probably does mean I'm really ignorant, but I would like to know more.
No, the significance.
Of the name?
Of the name,
Oh, yes, the significance of the name's engraved in my skull. And it's right on the edge there.
It is, yes.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, I'm fine with that. But work is in hand. Do you know, there's the largest stone circle in ruins here at Eglizuru. There's a whole load of work. I mean, I could fill my time with this place, but I can't, you can't get around all of it. I've got other things going on in the Lake District at the moment. So, but I do thank you for that, because Temple Gate is quite an interesting name, isn't it? Yeah, so where's the temple, Where is the temple? Well, this is a temple. We don't need to think about a temple being Cartesian, high Doric columns and a big roof that King Henry VIII pulled down. That can be the temple. And there's the biggest Christian monastery on this pilgrimage route here, down past Glanreed. Velindre Varcog is here, not on that road. Glanreed, down to Nevin, along here and down to St David's. And on top of Carningley is a back site down to St David's, which I've covered. If you've been to the symposium and other gigs I do, that you will see that there is a right down the alignment line to St David's, to two mountains where the sun sets, from which you can derive the 33-year cycle of the rising of the sun, which of course our whole Christian tradition centres on. That every 33 years the sun repeats its rising exactly. And that's after 33 years the sun, or the S-O-N, rises again, blocked by a stone at a tomb. I mean, it's compelling that it has its origins in a prehistoric version of the same myth or story or truth or experience. And of course it's highly Masonic. I mean, when Klaus showed me that picture of that thing with 33 sort of stripes getting ever smaller, I'm thinking, well, maybe there's a lot of astronomy to be explored in some of these very ancient artifacts. So, I think that is definitely the case. Okay, does that answer your question? Yeah, okay.
Thanks. Robin, I think I've actually mentioned this to you before, but I've been interested in dolmen, general name.
Been interested in?
Dolmens.
Dolmens, yeah.
Stones held up in the air by other stones. I don't believe that they have been always covered in earth, particularly Pentrevin.
Yeah.
So I'd like to know your view on that. But coupled to that, have you looked at the possibility that standing on top of Pentrevin, you might get a better view out to Bardsey?
I can't see Bardsey, but then the number of days you can see Bardsey from Pentrevin is limited anyway.
But on that line, with the extra elevation of standing on the top?
You put me in a very difficult position, sir, because Standing on top of Pentrefan would probably get me shot and banned from entering the national park. I'm well assured by somebody who's much naughtier than I am that, in fact, you could not see Bardsey Island from the top of the capstone. What you can see is the Preseli Bluestone site, the Stonehenge Bluestone site, which people find quite thrilling. So I can't comment. I think
all right, and on the earth cover subject, I don't believe any of these sites had earth covers.
Okay, well, I think the answer lies in the Preselis. If you go up to the big burial cairns on the top of the Preselis, Voelveddau, which is, again, a vesica at the top with a cairn on the front of it. Now, that's interesting, isn't it? And I'll show you where that is. If we go back from Pentrefan, there's Voelveddau. I've got the right slide. God smiles. Here we have Voelveddau here, and it's actually its shape is, at the top, is like that, with grass. Yep. And then there's a cairn, and I'm not sure whether that's modern or a reinforced version of an original, or whether the original's gone or what. But there is a big mound there, and then there is, so it's vesica shape, and there's lots of little gravelets around the side of that. Now, there's grass all over that site. It's in the most bleak and exposed spot on the Preselis, but there's grass there. But if you go over to Voel Area, which is here, also on this one, which is the Eagle's Nest, it's known as, that is at the same altitude as this, and there isn't a shred of grass or herbage anywhere on the stones that make up the cairn. And that has always interested me, because the climate must be very similar at both spots. And similar at Pentrefan, you've got the diagram that they give you on the notice board, which shows that the thing looked like a huge sleeping bag laid out on the field below Pentrefan. Yeah. And yet there is no sign of any earth to match that there now. And we've got other sites, which is like all of these, Treliffiant, Carragher Goff, Coetan Arthur, Lecha Dribeth. There's no real sign of any earth having been on the top of them. Now, I had an archaeologist threatening me years ago, who said, the sun setting through those triangles in Lecha Dribeth wouldn't have been visible if it was covered in earth. Smug look. So I said to him, it doesn't alter the fact that the people who built it had to build the stone thing before they covered it in earth, and when it did. And that didn't seem to satisfy him at all. And I think that's... I tend to go with the idea that I don't know. I mean, in other words, I'm taking the easy option. I'm not qualified to be able to tell you the answer to that. I know I find them in the state they're in and do work on them, and I'm very glad they haven't mounds on them. But Bryn Celli Ddu, when they were... it was, I think, in 1912, it was... Norman Lockyer went in there and did some work. He's the first man who discovered that midsummer... He was the astronomer royal, for heaven's sake. He's not a loony fringe. He went there on his honeymoon, I believe, so he was a bit loony. And he measured the passage angle of Bryn Celli Ddu and discovered that it was the midsummer sunrise. And when he was there was some earth on the top, and there was a hawthorn tree sticking out, a bit like Newgrange. It was ruinous. So that didn't have a lot of earth on it. But would it have had any on it if it had never had earth on it? I don't know the answer to that. It needs an archaeologist to answer that. And it needs archaeologists to date these sites. We actually need each other. That first slide of Mike Parker Pearson and I having a bit of a laugh is about that need that needs to happen, that we need to talk. And it's not because I feel threatened by them anymore. That's long since gone. It's because to get to the roots of what surely they're being paid to do, we need to integrate other disciplines into the subject. That's an important point, really. Okay, I'm sorry if I've dissatisfied you. It's a bad answer, as somebody said.
Well, I'm quite happy.
Okay, yeah.
So looking at what you've done here, it looks like the implications of this might be that you can start to predict what other sites there are and their relationship to each other on that landscape.
Yeah.
You can continue mapping that. Would that not allow
I'm in the process of doing that.
Yeah, that's
I
pretty
mean,
much what
if we
I'm
look at the landscape, There we are. I mean, already that's been visited, but the weather's been so awful when I've been that, and also the man who lives in the farm there has recently died, and I don't want to go along there and disturb his wife. And I know I'd like not to comment too much on that because I like to fix in my own mind the certainties and the accuracies before I make any sort of statement. But there are certainly some interesting coincidences. This line here goes right up to Chemice Head, which is the northernmost point south of Cardigan, and we know people who live on the properties right up there, so that's easy access. And it does appear that there is some sign that there were things there. Of course, we can only work with what's left.
Right.
And I haven't got ground scanning radar, and I can't investigate for holes or any of the other necessary things that are needed. All I can do is go and see if there's any evidence that there were holes or stones or whatever, or the folklore of an area. That's been so often the case that someone's come along with a story and it's led to the discovery of something that was once there, in a wall or something. But that's fairly convincing if you showed that to a surveyor and didn't call these anything other than stations, which is the surveying word for where you put your theodolite, they would say quite clearly that surveying was going on there. You'd have no problem. No one except archaeologists will have any problem with this. This is surveying. Because that length, that length, that length, that length, that length, and that length are all within a very tiny percentage of the same. And the angles are right. You know, you'd have trouble without a theodolite doing it as good, wouldn't you? You know, just with a rope and line and... whew.
It's interesting because there are a number of other writers that talk about, or rather, are mapping the world.
Thank you.
And pointing to the same patterns and using the same geometry. And the way that the circles are interlinked and create that 4-5 triangle also relates to mandalas and has some sort of physics, and the physics and the geometry actually relate to each other too. It's interesting, it seems to be more than a coincidence that it's built into our architecture and our ancient sites as well.
Yes, it's not always been connected with Britain, though, has it?
Yeah.
No, not at all.
Well, yes, someone's laughed there. Would you disagree with that? Was that laugh a disagreement or a...
No, it was an agreement, I think.
Okay, because you see, I think that... I think that if you, for example, those of you who are into geometry will know that that dimension there is multiplied by the square root of 3 to give us that dimension. So the way into the irrational numbers is through the Vesica Piscis. It's a construction that leads into that. Now, however obscure that might be, in the Sanskrit tradition and in the Rig Veda, the irrational numbers and the like square root of 3 and 5 and so on are created by this generatrix, which is this sort of cosmic vagina that they construct with their pens and compasses, and out of this comes the odd numbers and the irrational numbers, and so this is central to the theory of music and musical scales. And so these irrational numbers, these square roots, I mean, John Martineau could cover this better than I can, and would, no doubt, but this length here is root 3 of that length, and it's not root 3 plus a tiny little midge, it's root 3 exactly. And it's this that makes this structure of a cultural landmark for anybody who wants to derive a metrology or a musical scale, or cultural artifacts come from knowing this. Just as a pentagram, there are cultural artifacts that come from the pentagram. Pentagram, I mustn't say pentagon, because people think I'm talking about Washington, where no cultural artifacts come. Okay, next question. That's great. Yes, sorry. There's one here, Sean. Gentleman here. An Irish gentleman.
Sean, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Just first of all, a point of information. In 1780 or 1790, there was the last of the old Irish harpers had met at a festival in Belfast, and Bunting, who was collating their music on a normal way, you know, the normal scales and that, found out that their esoteric way of writing their music was Om. Ogam.
Yeah.
They used that as their sound and their script
So,
for their old harp music.
well, as I understand it, the problem with all ancient instruments is we don't hear them with the scales that they originally had.
No, but I'm saying that's what they did. The actual musicians, the harpists themselves,
Yes.
wrote their music down in Om.
Yeah.
That's how they did it, yeah.
Yeah, well, that's great.
One or two little questions. Nevern, what's the derivation of the name?
Well, it's Nan, N-A-N,
Yeah.
Hyver, which is the name of the river, which is Hyfer. F's a V in Welsh.
Yeah.
So it's Nan Hyver. And no one is really certain what that derivation is. The man who wrote the history of Nevern,
Yeah.
Dilwyn Miles, who's a Welsh speaker, I'm not a Welsh speaker, he goes into it in great detail that in fact there is no certainty what that actually means. The river grows up just near where they've discovered the new Bluestone. It has its head just near Bederavant, which is the megalithic monster on the moor just below Foel, and it comes down past the site, the ford, where they've discovered that new stone, and is a tributary of the main Nevern, which flows into the sea at Newport. So I asked Mike Parker Pearson, I mean, I'm digressing a bit, whether in fact he thought these stones were floated off at Newport, which would have saved an awful lot of miles going over a mountain. And if I had something 4 tons in weight and a river down the road, I'd tend to use the river down the road in preference to walking over the Preselles and getting to Milford Haven, putting it on a raft and watching it go bloop.
Well, if that was Dacia territory, Deces, as you say,
Yeah.
the Irish tribe,
Yeah.
Nev, the first part would be in Old Irish for the heavens.
What is?
Nev.
Nev.
N-E-M, and Nev, pronounced Nev, would have been
Thank
Old
you.
Irish for the
That
heavens.
is wonderful, isn't it, you
Yeah.
see? That is
It also
wonderful.
means poison as well in Old Irish.
Poison.
Poison in Old Irish. So they used to maybe...
I thought that was Guinness.
No. They used to pitch maybe a story on a poisonous event, but in actual fact, we're talking about the heavens.
Yeah,
If you're an esoterist.
That's a very interesting piece of information.
The other thing which I find in Ireland, which I usually go after, is the name of the saint attached to a place or the foundation saint.
Yeah.
Who's there? Who's
St. Brinac is the man, the saint that is associated with that church. Yeah, St. Brinac. The story of him and the cows is
Well, that's what I do in Ireland when I go into a town. The first place I go to is the Protestant church.
Is
Where is the Protestant church? Because it's usually on the old raths or the old sacred site. Because in 1540s, you know, the Reformation, they threw out all the, which I would say the Catholics, and took over the old sites, right?
Yes.
And I always ask who the saint is or who the local saint is.
Yeah.
And with that information, I start rummaging around and searching and see what I can pick up.
I believe it's always been St. Brinac.
Yeah, fair
Because
enough.
the legend here at Carningley is that St. Brinac went up there.
So he was attached to that as well.
He's attached to the mountain there, yes. And
Excellent.
I assume that's not a post-medieval or post-Reformation myth.
Whatever.
I mean, again, it's not my area, you see. We need a mythologist.
But I think in actual fact, that to me would be the software.
Yeah.
In one sense, but you've got to, as you say, research, but at the same time, keep a peripheral eyes open, as it were. You know?
You do have to incorporate this local knowledge.
Yeah.
Into. Thank you. Hang on.
Okay. I think that's it.
That's it, is it?
Yeah.
This lady, go on, let her have a go. Let her have a go. She's pleading.
Questions, not statements.
Sorry. Yes. No, I just wondered, picking up what we've just heard about heaven, I kept looking at this and saying, everything's wonderful that you've done, but where's heaven? And I just wondered if there wasn't as above, so below.
Well, heaven, dear, is the pole
No,
star.
I know, but at that point it was Thuban and Draco, wasn't it? And Cygnus points to it. And I kept seeing Cygnus in your...
Right.
I just wondered if you
Well, Andrew
looked
Collins
at
would be
that.
delighted, wouldn't he?
Well, I don't know. I
Yeah.
just wondered.
But,
It's a
the
question.
issue is you can't get fixed north without knowing the heavens. And you don't need
I
the
know.
pole star to fix north.
But it wasn't Polestar in those days.
Well, that's
it was
right.
Thuban,
but
wasn't
that's
it?
old,
As at
you know,
Newgrange.
that's fine. Is that what you're trying to tell me?
I was just going to ask you
Yeah.
if you looked at the constellations as they would have been.
Well, I have done, and I think that the way that they measured north in those days was to do the classic way of watching a star rise, a circumpolar star rise and set, and then marking the way it rose and set on a level plate and bisected.
But we've seen Orion and so many other things in South America. I think Cygnus was very important
Yeah.
in Ireland. There's a lot of that. Sorry, there's a lot of Cygnus formations in Newgrange and places like that, and
Well,
I just wondered if it's possibly reflected
I look
here.
forward to the article you submit to my website. Thank you very much for listening.